welcome back. I'm here today with, obviously wasn't prepared, with a double bill of pulp from the 50s and 60s. One from America, one from Britain, to show you the difference between the different type of pulp. The first one is the Earth Dies Screaming. Oh, there we go, Earth Dies Screaming. And then, again, I get the wrong way, the Blob. See, I have to remember stage left, normal left, and stuff like that. I was training this stuff, so I should know it, but I just forgotten. So The Earth Dies Screaming is a Terence Fisher movie from the 60s. This was kind of movie that Americans would put money into British films that were cheap. They'd bring an American star in, or one or two American stars to be in the film, and then they would cast a lot of British actors around about it. So this one is Dennis Price as the lead British actor, and a guy called Willard Parker, along with his wife Virginia Field as the other stars of the film. It lasts a whole hour, so it's a very short film. Created by Terence Fisher from the Hammer films, did Dracula, Curse of Frankenstein. This was made after he'd done all those films, so he must have. It was made before he back did some more Hammer films, so this must have been one of his quieter periods after he'd done a lot of films. But he had one or two films that hadn't done so well. We did Curse of the Werewolf, which is a big budget film that hadn't done so great. So he was doing these lower budget films as well. And it is really nice, a really nice little film, a little B-movie. It's got a lot of charm to it. The idea is basically, is the world, people in the world have just dropped dead. Everybody was just dropping dead. Just slowly dropping dead. No one knows why, but we're in a small area in Britain. So no one knows it's Britain itself or it's the whole world. But in Britain, that happens, and then we go with this guy, Willard Parker, who was on a plane at the time. He's a flyer, aviation specialist, who was higher than the area affected when it happened. So when he landed his plane, everyone seemed to have dropped dead. And so he starts looking around, trying to work out what went on, what happened, and he starts to run into other people who also survived. Because they were in various places, the woman, Virginia Field, she was in an oxygen tent because she had a medical emergency when it happened, and that somehow saved her. Even a young couple who were in this location that was somehow secured as they were travelling up from south to north. So they just got lucky. So certain people got lucky, they were in locations that were closed off, so they didn't get infected with whatever affected the rest of the world. So they start running into people, and also running into Dennis Price, who is a bit dodgy, who's really stalkerish to Virginia Fields, and he's just a nasty piece of work. He's obviously a criminal. You know, and everyone knows he's a criminal, everyone knows he's dodgy, no one trusts him for a second. So you get all these people trying to work out what to do with this, and there's these robots walking around in a very Doctor Who-like style, very Cyberman. And it's this nice atmosphere. It has an atmosphere that you're going to get in the 70s Doctor Who, where the Tom Baker Job 3 stuff, where there's a lot of atmosphere to make up for the lack of budget. And this one is just people talking, try to work it out. They're in a bar for most of it, and they have to go around the village, try to work it out. And they find some guns in a area for the local army, where they've managed to break into and find some guns and some bullets, which means they can shoot at the robots that are coming towards them every so often. But also the robots can bring the people back to life, because it turns out the people aren't technically dead, they can be turned into something else. So the people come back and start to walk with zombies. This is before Night of the Living Dead, so they're not trying to eat you, they're just coming towards you and you don't know what they want. So you have to shoot them as well. So it has this really weird atmosphere of these people who you knew can't come back from the dead. And you don't know what they want, but it looks like an alien invasion. And the whole thing is what's causing it and how they control these people and what do we do, because they've already said they're going to leave the village, but the young couple, the woman is pregnant, heavily pregnant, and she's about to give birth. So and her husband's panicking. So there's a lot of character stuff. You have the con man Dennis Price, the young couple, Willard Parker being the solid one. You've got a drunk couple who were partying at the time. They've been married for a while. So you've a bunch of people who are all very dysfunctional in their own way and have to try and come together. And because it's 60 minutes long, you don't know no one gets annoyed. No one gets really annoyed. Everyone, the husband is a bit annoying to start with, but he calms down because that's meant to be the character anyway. So you get people reacting, and then a quite enjoyable to watch. And then eventually the film ends with a conclusion, where they find a source of the broadcast. They stop it in the area, but they're not promising they're going to stop it around the world or anything. Just like they've saved themselves in this area. That's it. So it's not a particularly happy ending. It's not a down ending. It's an ending where other things could happen. It was one of those ones that you could have had a series of this film idea. I'm quite amazed there wasn't a series based on this one. But it's a really good, solid sci-fi movie. It's what you can do in that time in black and white with a very limited budget if you stick to the ideas. I mean, if you look at the 50s with Quatermass, they stuck to the ideas. The effects weren't great, but the effects worked for what you needed in the film. Even some of the Hammer films, like the early Hammer films like Dracula and Curse of Frankenstein, they didn't have great effects. They had a lot of ideas in them. And that's what British films tended to do, is have ideas and progress ideas. And this is a situation, at least to this situation, and it develops, and some people die, some people rise up, but it's a situation that's all developing. And that's what's really good about this film. It's similar to Village of the Damned. It's a very short film. There's even got some scenes from Village of the Damned in it. With a lot of outtakes they had. They didn't use that film, they used this film. Like raw footage, like stock footage. So it works pretty well. And it's which is kind of weird because I could spot it because I'd seen Village of the Damned 3 weeks ago. So it was so obvious to me. But this is a very good film, a very solid film. I really enjoyed it. It's a perfect example of a 60s British film where they had not much money but they had imagination. And they kept a very simple premise and they really did it well. Now we have The Blob, which is the film from the 50s, American 50s film. It came at the end of the monster movie period. And to be honest, I was not very keen on this film. It had a reputation as being pretty good, but I didn't think much of it. I much prefer the remake. The remake is kind of like the film that takes advantage of the inherent idea of the scary blob. This one has a blob for like 5 minutes, has lots of talking. It's basically the boy that cried wolf for most of it. It's like Steve McQueen in his first performance, and he's terrible. You can see a lot of mannerisms going to become Steve McQueen later on, but he's miscast. He's playing a guy who's a nice guy, who's a studies guy. He's a bit rebellious here or there, but he's generally nice and thought he was a bit square, which is not Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen's the rebel guy. And you can see him fighting against this part really hard, because he obviously knows this part isn't suitable for him. So he's trying, but it's very uncomfortable to watch. And there's other actors around him that, when they get the actors allowed to chat between themselves, it manages to be fun, but when they have to stick to the script and plot points, it becomes very annoying. Because basically the thing is, you start out with Steve McQueen with his girl on the driving around. They see the thing crash. They go and try and check it out. They find a guy with his hand covered with a blob. They take him to a doctor. The doctor gets killed. The doctor's assistant gets killed. McQueen goes to the cops. They don't believe him because he was making trouble earlier on that night, even though he's meant to be a good boy. Even though he's 28. So it's just makes no sense. And then it's basically him going back to the police every so often saying, look, honestly, it happened, and just saying, we'll get to the bomb of tomorrow morning. And for the first 2/3 of the movie, he has to investigate around the police and avoid the police until he finds the blob, finds proof of the blob, when the blob finally attacks a cinema. Using really old special effects that look really dodgy now. And eventually the last 10 minutes have to deal with the blob. Now the frustrating thing in this film is, from what I said before about Earth Dies Screaming, is where they took a premise and they built upon it again and again to keep it interesting. This is one premise. There's a blob. And no one spots it apart from Steve McQueen. That's it. That's all it is. It's basic script writing. He says, I saw this, and no one else saw it. They can't find the bodies. You've lots of exposition. Or something that's very frustrating because you know the blob exists, and you listen to these characters saying, no, it doesn't exist. You can, why am I wasting my time watching this? And it goes on and on that way for so long, and then finally, it's like, well, when it's finally discovered he's telling the truth, it's not like, oh, great, he's telling the truth, you believe him. It's like, yeah, I know, it's been so annoying for an hour. Just finally. So it doesn't work. The plot, that could have worked for like half an hour. But half an hour is as far as that could have gone. And they could easily have had the Blob going through the town and causing trouble, and the cops try to find it. It would have made for a much better film, a much subtler film, a much, just more enjoyable film with dramatic stakes, and they're giving McQueen something to do. Instead, it becomes this boring thing of, I saw it, no you didn't, I saw it, no you didn't, I saw it, no you didn't. For an hour. Yeah, that's for an hour. It's just annoying. It's not a good film. It's really not as good as its reputation suggests. And I put the criterion of this one. It's like, well, why is this on Criterion? It's not Criterion level at all. And put this in Criterion. This is more Criterion level than the Blob. And even that I wouldn't call Criterion level after it's streaming. But it's better than the Blob by a mile. But it shows a difference of point of view where the Americans want either action or inaction. That's what I noticed about a lot of American films in the 50s. It's either you're waiting for something to happen and you're saying why it can't happen, or something's happening and you're dealing with the action of it. So in stuff like them, you've got a problem you're dealing with constantly throughout it. That kind of works. And you've got Creature from Black Lagoon, you're always dealing with a problem. It works. You're always dealing with something. And they're going a lot faster than you would go on a British film, which would take its time more and more atmosphere to investigate the idea. The American would go much further. But when they can't go very fast, those films, the American 50s films, tend to be very frustrating because you're just like, get to the point, get to the point. I remember watching Silent Earth, and it just took forever for anything to happen. And it was like so frustrating. I was like, just get to the point. And if Blob's at the same problem, it's just like, we get to the point, please. Something happened. That's frustrating on American films in the 50s that weren't the good ones. The bad ones tend to just frustrate by knowing there's only so many special effects, so you have to keep bringing it back and not doing anything until you've got the effects for it. Because you want them to pay off, so that's where you're going to spend your money. In the British films, they don't have money for effects anyway, so whatever they use is not going to look great, so they'll just try and build atmosphere up. So it's a difference between a slow build and a blow it all in 20 minutes budget type of thing. But you get one that managed to do it really well. Like The Thing, because they didn't have that much money, they were very careful how they worked the story out. So when you do it right, where it is action but it's also suspense, you can get a lot from it, but you have to be very careful. And I just think it just showed the difference between American take and sci-fi and British take. It's expanded through the years. American sci-fi is still very impatient to get to the next thing, and the films just a bit faster with more money for budget, so they can get to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing constantly. Now, but still, there's not much introspection. In the British, they tend to talk about stuff slowly for a long time. Even something like Doctor Who is much faster now, which takes more the back idea of this happens, this happens, this happens. It's much more introspective than a Star Trek episode. Even though Star Trek started out as introspective, it became much more actiony. At least for me, because Star Trek, I just think a lot of times they talk about nothing. It just becomes this thing of non-stop action. It becomes it's just a different take. I mean, I think in Britain now has become too aspiring to become more like America and actually have action, and it doesn't work because we don't have the budget and we don't have the character for it. So I much prefer British films to take the more of dice streaming approach of slowly, subtly building. But the Blob's kind of like the worst example of a American monster movie of this is American at its most basic is we wait for the effects to arrive. We have nothing to say about the monster until the effects arrive. That's it. I'm referring to say it in the characters because the characters are placeholders. That's all they are. So that's the Blob. I hated it. I'm keeping it only because I've got a Criterion and it looks nice, but it's not a good film. I doubt I'll watch it again. I'm just keeping it as a collector more than anything. So I hope you enjoyed this video, this mix of British sci-fi and American sci-fi. I watched them both in one afternoon, so I thought it would be a nice contrast. Right, I'll be back soon with another one. Bye for now.